Hello, everyone, and welcome. Still see a few of you trickling on in here, so we'll give it a couple minutes and then we'll kick this off here shortly. All right. We're about two after the hour, so while we wait for a few more to join, I'll go through the housekeeping items here. But first, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us here, talk about simplifying participant governance as it pertains to data, fraud, and the DOL. We're really excited to have you here today. My name is Jack Hartwig, Marketing Manager here at the Berwyn Group. We have a great panel to talk about the participant governance element. But first, just so you all know, this webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the recording will be sent out to each of you about 24 hours after we conclude here today. You'll notice that there's a Q&A box. Feel free to ask any questions that you have along the way in that Q&A box, and we will try to answer as many as we can towards the end. This is one of our shorter webinars, so we'll try to get through as many as possible. But if we don't, we will follow up with you afterwards, so feel free to ask away. Additionally, there is a post-webinar survey, and we always appreciate feedback on these webinars there. That's a big reason why we're putting this one on today, a shorter, bite-sized webinar due to popular request, and we always appreciate any feedback. Additionally, we have recently released our 2026 Missing Participant Playbook. If you're interested in getting a copy of that, you can opt in for that in that post-webinar survey or reach out to us directly. So really excited to have you all here. Our agenda at a glance is just talking about the shift in participant governance, what's happening in the industry, the market with regulations, rethinking the approach to participant governance, really talking about a change in methodology, that being CertiCensus and how that works, and then the impact of CertiCensus. Our speakers today, we have our president, John Bikes, on the call here. We have Mike Schoenfeld, General Manager of Pensions, and Lindsay McDonald, Revenue Director. And so John will get us started here talking about the current state of the industry and some considerations for you all. So John, I'll pass things over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jack. If you want to go to the next slide. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you. Appreciate your time today. At the Berwyn Group, we've evolved and will continue to evolve from what I'll call individual approaches to death audit or missing participants into more of a population management solution. There are multiple ways to deal with participant governance. One is, as I mentioned, individual solutions, death audit, beneficiary research, locate services. And those might work in some cases, maybe many cases, depending on what type of plan you're in. But there's another approach, which is a more comprehensive approach, and that's CertiCensus, and that's what we'll be referencing today. But before we get to CertiCensus itself, we're going to talk a little bit about why CertiCensus and why a comprehensive approach matters. And really, there are a couple of drivers behind why a comprehensive approach to population management works or is necessary. One is governance, and the other is data. Those are really the two drivers behind why we try to create a comprehensive solution. So, Jack, if you want to go to the next slide. First, we'll touch on governance. And as many of you are very familiar with, the regulatory environment has shifted meaningfully over the last 4 years. The DOL issued missing participant guidance in January of 2021, followed by cybersecurity guidance just 3 months later, and then Secure 2.0 was signed into law at the end of 2022. What does this mean? It means the message from regulators is clear. Participant data governance is no longer an option. It needs to be taken seriously, and we believe comprehensively. But beyond just governance, there are other things that come into play here. And this will have to do with data, which we'll talk about in a second. But when you talk about population management, there are several issues, not only identifying decedents, which most people are very familiar with, but also identifying missing participants, figuring out what data is good and what data is bad. All of those things come into play when you start talking about population management. And it's much easier, we think, to take those things holistically versus individually. And that's what we'll get to in this particular presentation. So Jack, if you want to go to the next slide. This is a slide many of you have seen before, and the question is, okay, we're talking about population management. Why are we focused on this? I think there are a couple of reasons here. One reason is the continued focus on death audit, and death audit continues to evolve. It continues to be a very important part of population management. And as we all know, this graph shows what's happened with the Death Master File, or as it's now called, the Limited Access Death Master File, which used to cover 95% of all deaths. All you needed was name and social security number. You were good to go. Now it covers only 16% of all deaths. There are no state records in it. And in addition, it continues to be manipulated, if you want to use that word, by the federal government. Last year they put in people who were actually alive who they wanted to cut off benefits to. So there's a real credibility question about one single data source. So we all probably know that part of the story. But what's an important part of the story here as well is the way that we got into CertiCensus has to deal with this graph. So when death audits started to become really difficult, it became necessary to go out and get a lot more data, different data sources. Instead of one source and a name and social security number, now you need thousands, tens of thousands of sources, and you need names, you need addresses, you need dates of birth, you need relatives. You need as much data as you can to identify a decedent. The primary reason being that over 85% of all decedent identification comes from obituaries. Obituaries are not a standardized data set, structured data set. So you need as much information as you can to make sure you're not missing any deaths. And so where this leads into with CertiCensus is when this happened and we started to aggregate all these data sources and we started to look at the data that our clients, our partners were sending us and comparing those to the data that was out there or that was necessary to identify a decedent, it became obvious really quickly that data sets were incomplete. They weren't updated. They were wrong in many cases. And so they were missing addresses. They were missing social security numbers, or the social security numbers were wrong. Dates of birth were missing or wrong. There were no relatives that had been updated in a long time. And so that's when our aha moment took place. That's when Pandora's box opened. Pandora's box was need all this data. We started getting the data from clients, and the data was incomplete or just not good. And so what do you have to do? In order to identify a decedent now, you need to clean up all this data. But that led us down the path of when you're cleaning up the data, you also need to validate addresses. You need to identify beneficiaries. You need to make sure social security numbers are right. So this graph is not only important from the standpoint of, hey, the Death Master File is no longer the Death Master File. This was the impetus for us to develop CertiCensus because once we needed data from clients, Pandora's box opened. And we realized the data was bad, and we had to come up with a solution that would benefit our clients holistically. And that's where CertiCensus, this was the beginning of CertiCensus. And so I think it's important to understand that this wasn't just a made-up process or you guys just came up with this. It actually was an evolution based on the start of death audit and then extending into population management itself. So Jack, if you want to go to the next slide. So we've got governance we talked about in the first slide. We started talking about data in the second slide. And in the third slide here, it really is about bad data. So bad data creates not just operational headaches, but bad data creates financial exposure. When you talk about not having the right social security number, you might not be identifying a decedent. When you don't have updated beneficiaries or incorrect beneficiaries, someone who is owed a benefit might not be receiving that benefit, or someone who isn't owed a benefit might be receiving a benefit incorrectly or fraudulently. So bad data is a risk in addition to governance being the reason that we need to look at this holistically. And increasingly, plan auditors are asking not only about death audit, they're asking about missing participants, and they're asking about data as a whole. We've actually had clients tell us that when they've shown an auditor their CertiCensus process, and not only the results from the process, but just as importantly, the audit trail from the process, the auditor's good. The auditor's happy because they don't have to look at a bunch of different documents from an audit standpoint. They don't have to try to piece things together with regard to, is this participant deceased or are they missing? Do you have updated records? Is your PII correct? When you've got it all in one space, organized for an auditor, it makes life really easy, not only for the plan, but it makes it easy for the auditor, and everyone goes away happy. So bad data is a huge risk. How do you address bad data is the key. And bad data is a combination of not only bad, not identifying decedents, it's not having the right social security numbers, not having the right beneficiaries, not having the right addresses. And that can all be done holistically versus individually. And that's why we created CertiCensus. If you want to go to the next slide, Jack. What, you know, as many of you are familiar, one of the big things that we see across the marketplace is, as I mentioned, up until recently, and even now, the way that all of these things I've talked about, whether it's death audit, whether it's missing participants, whether it's bad information or missing information like beneficiaries or wrong social security numbers or dates of birth, a lot of times those things are handled individually in a siloed way. And that could be on the vendor side, or it could be on the plan administration side. So you might have different teams handling different processes. Death audits here, address verification there. And there's no unified view of the participant's status. And the consequences there are very predictable. You have outreach going to participants who are deceased or who have moved. You have overpayment slipping through. You have missing beneficiary data creating probate implications. And you have a limited ability to demonstrate compliance to auditors or regulators. And we see this all the time. We run individual projects for people, for clients, and we run holistic projects like CertiCensus. And when you have a comprehensive workflow, it's much easier to show the value to the client and the value to the auditor than when you have these individual things happening that you have to try to piece together. So the impact on the market from governance and bad data has been siloed processes because now there's a focus on multiple things. It's not just have you identified all the decedents, it has you identified missing participants. When you have to focus on multiple things and you're doing multiple processes, it's really difficult to put all of those things together individually. It's much easier to put them together holistically. And that's what we're trying to do with CertiCensus. You want to go to the next slide, Jack? So we have rethought the approach, as I've mentioned several times. And if you keep going, Jack, we can cycle through this pretty quickly. And we've thought about this, again, not only because of what we've seen, but because of what we've heard from our clients. So at the Berwyn Group, as many of you are familiar, as the largest provider of these types of services in the United States, we have over 1,500 pension plans that we're working with on death audit or population management or in some other respect. What we've heard from them has helped us create this comprehensive solution. Again, managing disconnected processes. As governance comes into play and plans have to focus as much on missing participants as they do on decedents, now you've got multiple processes and those processes can be disconnected. In addition to that, we have bad data, and we talked about it at the very beginning. We don't just see bad data in pension plan populations. We work across thousands of organizations in many different verticals, including insurance, financial services, healthcare. We see the same thing in every channel. That is, population data is very, very hard to maintain. And that's for various reasons. You know, we have people that move, we have different systems that are consolidated, you have companies that are purchased and sold, you have planned transactions, a lot of different things going on depending on the channel. And so you have bad data to start with. So you have bad data, you have disconnected processes, and then in addition to that, you have, once something happens, an event happens, in particular a pension plan, like a death, it's reactive. A death has just occurred. Now you need to figure out, okay, who's the beneficiary? Or do we have the right address to contact the person or the family, either for verification or for follow-up? Are we sure this person is really deceased? Because do we have the right social security number? And is that social security number correct in this part of the system and that part of the system? So you have all of these different processes that are happening internally. You have bad data. You just need a better way to see everything. And by the way, a big part of this that we hear often that seems to be a lot of times it's in the background has to do with return mail. So return mail is a big issue across many plans, but not only in the pension plan world, but also in the insurance world, the financial services world, dealing with return mail. And dealing with return mail is difficult because the U.S. Postal Service continues to degrade, is what we've heard. And so you've got to have people focused on this, not just, for a certain period of time, but we think over the long haul to make sure you've got the right processes in place to handle return mail. Especially as things changed with the mail system. And return mail, as an example, on the data side, part of CertiCensus is annual funding notices for those plans that need them. We have some plans where it's an easy way for us to identify missing participants, for example. So when an AFN goes out, in theory, that's the correct address because you've got a governance notification requirement. We have 5% of AFNs come back to us returned. To me, that's an indication that missing participants are an issue. Return mail is an issue. The size of that issue is going to depend on the size of the plan population, but we know it's an issue because with AFNs, we see 5% return mail. Industry standard is typically 3 to 6%, so we've seen the high end of that with people who are in CertiCensus. The good news is, with CertiCensus, we've taken that 5% down to 1% in 1 year. And so that's a pretty dramatic swing. And the reason for that, again, is because it's a comprehensive approach, not an individualized approach based on return mail or missing participants over here and death audit over here. Okay, Jack, I want to go to the next one. And so as I've talked several times about CertiCensus here, CertiCensus has been shaped by several things. Internally, we for a long time have run individual projects on death audit. We've run them on missing participants, so locate. We've run beneficiary searches. But then when we put together, all of those project types with what we learned when death audit changed and what we heard from our customers with regard to, wow, this is really difficult because now I've got regulatory agencies on me about death audit, they're on me about missing participants. At the end of the day, this is about making sure a benefit goes to someone who's owed a benefit. That's why we're all here. It's really hard to do it in today's world with the technology, the systems, the bad data, return mail and the post office changing. How do we come up with a solution? And that's where we develop CertiCensus, which again is intended to bring everything together under one roof, so that not only are we making sure that the population is taken care of and beneficiaries or people who are owed a benefit are getting that benefit, we're also creating that audit trail so that whatever regulatory agency is responsible for oversight or an audit or whatever board might be there, or any other individual or group who's responsible for some type of oversight on the plan, you've got a comprehensive document you can put in front of them that shows, number one, the great work you're doing to make sure people who are owed a benefit get that. But number two, where there are gaps or missing participants or you don't have data updated, all the work that you've done to make sure that everything that could be done has been done. And that's where CertiCensus comes into play. With that, I'll turn it over.
Perfect. Thank you for that, John. Lindsay, we'll hand things over to you to talk a little bit about how CertiCensus works, the components.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Let's go on to the next slide so we have a visual here. So when we talk to our clients, one of the biggest challenges we consistently hear is maintaining an accurate population over time, especially as participants move, they pass away, or they just become difficult to locate. CertiCensus is designed to solve that problem and provide you peace of mind, ensuring that your population is accurate, up to date, and you're not carrying any unnecessary risk. It's an end-to-end solution designed to continuously monitor and manage your population, from identifying decedents to locating your missing participants, and ultimately finding those beneficiaries. As John mentioned, rather than thinking about these as separate one-time projects, CertiCensus brings all of these pieces together in a single continuous workflow where each step just builds upon the next. This slide that we're looking at today shows how these pieces fit together. So we have participant communication, where we manage the full outreach process, including required mailings and tracking all of that returned mail, so it's no longer stacking up on your desks. We're locating missing participants, where we'll proactively correct addresses and reestablish those connections with those participants. We're identifying the decedents, where we're validating obituaries, state, and SSA death records with a very high level of accuracy, which is really the key driver of risk reduction. And then we're finding those beneficiaries. Once we validate a death, we identify and locate those beneficiaries to ensure proper benefit handling. And in the end is the reporting. All of this is supported by real-time reporting and a complete audit trail. You have access to this information 24/7 through our online portals, where you can pull this information at any time you possibly need it. What makes this solution powerful is it's not just a one step, one moment in time, like I mentioned before. It's a continuous cycle. Each piece feeds upon the next, so nothing falls through the cracks. So now we're going to jump over to the next slide, and we're going to take a deep dive into how these pieces all together and what this really looks like on a day-to-day basis. So it all starts with your participant file. There are certain data elements that we need to ensure that we have to make this process work. That would be including first name, last name, social, date of birth, and then the last known address you have on file. That address could be a known address, so you don't have to think that you have all good address information to start. That's the purpose of the service, is that we're updating this. If you do feel like you may have some missing information around specifically names, dates of birth, and SSNs, or you know it might be bad, there's ways in which that we can take a look at that ahead of time and ahead of uploading your files. So it's always good to have that conversation ahead of time. We can help update that information as soon as possible. Once we ingest that file, right away we kick off the death audit monitoring. You get reports on a weekly basis, whoever has passed away in your file. We have a full operations team that on a daily basis is looking at this information. Like I mentioned, obituaries, state records, SSA records, they're reviewing this constantly and making those connections. Once we do identify somebody as deceased, we automatically kick those into a relative search or a beneficiary search. This is a really detailed report with a lot of information on it. We put a lot of focus on identifying the spouse of the deceased participants, whether they were married at the time of death or they weren't. If we determine that they were married at the time of death, we're providing you that spouse's name, their date of birth, their current address, their phone number, so you can make contact with them. We are also doing a death audit on that spouse, so you'll know right away if that spouse was currently living or deceased. The report also comes with marriage and divorce record information, so you can see along the lines, there's certainly people that have been married several times and divorced several times, and you can see that history of there, and it gives the dates in which those events happened, so you can clearly tie back your benefits. We are also identifying first-degree relatives, so the parents and children to that deceased participant. And we also go through siblings, cousins, other family members as such. Every possible connection that we identify relative, we're also providing you all the contact information, so their current address and phone number, like I mentioned before, as well as their date of birth. So you have several points of contact in which you can make outreach into uniting those benefits if those carry on down. There's also several ways. We're going to move over into how we locate participants. There's several different points that we do in this process. So when we first receive your file, right away, we are checking the address that you submitted versus what we are showing as most current and seeing if there's any discrepancies there. You're going to be able to see right away the percentage of your population that has outdated information. We are also preparing your file for required mailing. This is optional, but it is highly recommended to do this. For a lot of our clients, that required mailing looks like an annual funding notice, but sometimes it could be a different type of notification. What's really required is that it's a standard communication that's going out to all participants. If you do have variations of a required mailing, we can also manage that within your population. This is something we'll just want to talk about ahead of setting up your account. We can definitely send different types of mailings to different participants that are categorized as a specific way. Sometimes we work with union plans where they have a specific print house or union print house vendor that they have to utilize. We can also work through that and utilize a notification mailing instead of a required mailing, and we can kind of deep dive on what that looks like. But that's more of a notification that's letting your participants know that you're working with the Berwyn group on updating this sort of information on a continuous basis. We are managing all returned mail that comes from these required mailings. So I mentioned before, there is no more worry about these required or these return mailings getting stacked up on your desk and wondering what you do next with this. That information all comes back to us. And in combination with the participants that we have identified through our quarterly address checks with the address discrepancy, along with anything that comes back as a return piece of mail from a required mailing, goes into our more in-depth locate process. So this is where we're making outreach to your participants. And we do this in a series of different ways. We use letters to send out. The letters are something that you can customize with your own specific reason on the letters. We put logos on those letters. We work with you to get those right before we send any communication out to your participants. And we test those letters on a multiples of different addresses. So we're mailing to what we believe is the most current address, what you provided to us on your file, and next best addresses after that if they do not respond to those series of mailings. We're also making outbound phone calls to your participants. So that really helps uptick the response rate. Typically, if a participant receives a few mailings and then we follow up by a phone call, it just helps make that process even more legitimate. They pay attention and they know that they need to respond and take action. As soon as your participants respond, we are sending you those updated addresses. Along with your death audit weekly report, you're also getting a locate weekly report in which you can see the address that the participant has confirmed themselves. So we are never going to tell you to update an address on one that we just feel like they might be living at. This communication is coming directly from the participant. And those participants can respond to us in a number of different ways. We have a full-time call center. They can mail back the bottom portion of the letter. We provide the envelopes in which they mail back to. Or there's a self-report online portal that these participants have access to 24/7 as well. All right, Jack, we'll go to the next slide. And just to reiterate, because it's important, this service is a proactive population management solution. You do not have to be reactive in this process. Everything is done for you to ensure that we have the most accurate information on file. As far as identifying deaths, making sure you have current address information, and having the beneficiary information as soon as you need it. It's a continuously monitoring and a comprehensive reporting. Like I mentioned before, you have access to this data at your fingertips whenever you need it. It's really to prepare you for being audit ready. The reports that we provide to you are very specific, participant specific, and you can follow each participant along through the whole process and see exactly the steps and on which dates that we have done each action for them. You also get access to a dedicated account manager. So any questions that you have along the process, they're there for you. We have a full data scientist team. We are always looking at ways to improve the data in which we utilize to keep your records up to date. If you have any questions about security or IT outcomes, we also have you covered there. We're fully SOC 2 Type 2. We encrypt all of our information from end to end. So as soon as that data is coming into our system in transit, at rest, and going back out to you is all encrypted. So you can rest assured that your information is as safe as it possibly can be. And we all do this with a really accurate information. So 98% of deaths that we identified, current deaths out there that we're identifying with a 99.9% accuracy rate. Next, we're going to move on. Mike Schoenfeld's going to take the lead, and he's going to talk to you more about specific success stories and really the impact of what this service provides.
Thanks, Lindsay. And as John talked about the genesis of CertiCensus, why was it created? What were the challenges that we saw in this market? Lindsay went through the process and really spoke to that workflow and the different services that CertiCensus really encompasses to deliver results. And so those results, really the intent here is those results are delivering that 98% of all possible death matches are identified with a 99.9% accuracy rate. What that means is you can actually take action on these. So it's not something where it requires additional work. It doesn't require additional review. It's really an actionable outcome. These deaths are also identified within 5 business days or less. So the timeliness is key here as well. So it's preventing those overpayments. The other challenge that it really seeks to address, as John had mentioned, the return mail piece, we actually find with CertiCensus that 33% of the participant addresses are actually bad. So when we talk about return mail, that's somebody actually sending it back. That's the post office sending that back, or somebody that writes return to post office or RPO on there to send it back. We can see through the data that we ingest on the initial file uploads with CertiCensus that 33% of that participant data is bad. As we look at within a 1-year period, that 33% goes down to about 6 or 7%. That is something that is, as people always move and constantly shift or get married, that's always something that will change, and that's one of the challenges that CertiCensus addresses as well. As Lindsay mentioned, from a beneficiary standpoint, so we see within our populations that we administer that a death might occur and the spouse is listed as spouse or wife or maybe an initial. What CertiCensus incorporates is when that decedent is identified, the natural next step is to identify that spouse or that surviving beneficiary. And that's what CertiCensus encompasses as well. Not only do we have a lot of success with the beneficiary research process, but you can see that 95% of the time we are able to find a first-degree relative. So bringing that benefit to that participant or that beneficiary within a timely manner makes it very, very important. And then obviously the confirmed addresses as well through the mail outreach that we have, but confirming that address, not only does that allow you to prevent the return mail, but knowing your population, knowing where they're at, being able to communicate with them on a timely fashion. That could be with announcements or newsletters. That could be even, we've got clients that send out letters or notifications on an annual barbecue. These are ways for our clients to be able to interact with their participants more proactively. So instead of addressing a problem, they can actually engage their members. And we see this through the stories that our clients have shared with us. So if we move to the next slide, I'll let you read some of these that are on the screen, but we've had, there's a recent example of a client that started CertiCensus, and we were able to find a decedent that was actually somebody that was dead for a long period of time. The individual was dead for about 7 years. They had no idea that that individual was dead. This individual had never started their benefit. So they'd passed away right before the minimum distribution age, but had accrued a benefit that their beneficiary was due. Because they didn't know that this individual was deceased, they didn't know who that beneficiary was or even to start that process. So when we were able to let them know that that individual was indeed deceased, they were able to find that their records didn't have a current address, they didn't have the beneficiary, at least not a beneficiary that they thought was accurate, because their particular plan required that the benefit was paid to the individual that was listed on the account at time of marriage. And so what CertiCensus was able to do was to locate that beneficiary, and was able to locate that beneficiary actually through the next of kin, so through children, to be able to identify who that beneficiary was, to then track down the beneficiary with a communication, and allowed that beneficiary to be reconnected to the plan. This individual had no idea that they were due a benefit. And so the impact to them wasn't just that they were now receiving a benefit as a spousal benefit, but also the past due or the back pay that they were due to a tune of about $150,000 in back pay pensions. So not only did they get that money, they were able to get a monthly benefit, and that benefit also included health benefit coverage as well. Game-changing resources for this particular individual. We have plenty of these stories in situations where the impact that CertiCensus is able to provide from a business perspective of ensuring that when that audit takes place, you are audit ready. It will tell you every step of the way, every process that your participant, your census file is in. But the true impact is why we as pension administrators or people in this pension space do what we do, is to be able to deliver that benefit to those individuals when that benefit is due. Not only does the CertiCensus apply in an ongoing plan administration, but we also have funds that use us when they're looking at doing a cash buyout or a pension risk transfer to be able to communicate with their participants to clean up their data over a period of time. This is not intended to replace project business. So, for example, if you have a one-time cleanup that you're looking to do, it's really looking to say, I want to make sure that my population and my data is as clean as it can be for a period of time. Generally, we see these from anywhere from 1 year to 3, 5, 10-year contracts. But we see that with pension risk transfers and de-risking activity, as well as those cash balance cleanup. We also see it when clients consolidate funds. So this could be an acquisition of another fund and an assimilation of funds. We see funds use CertiCensus to be able to clean up that participant content as well. But all very, very impacting. With that, Jack, I think we'll turn it over to some Q&As.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Mike. Got a couple questions here out of the gates, and you just talked about the reporting, Mike, and I may direct this one to Lindsay to start. But as far as our reporting goes, integration, how does that work from like an automation standpoint? Is it all manual? What do you typically see clients doing to, work with these reports and make it as simple as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are capabilities to have some automation in place. So I think the question was specifically, do I have to go into the portal and pull these reports every time for myself? The answer is a combination of yes and no. Those weekly reports where we're sending you updated information, if you would like, you can pull those from the portal. We also utilize SFTP connections where we can set that up between ourselves and send you those weekly custom reports for you. Those weekly reports for you. The portal also has the ability to do custom reporting. So if you want to deep dive into any particular part of the process of census, you can. So for an example, I want to know every person that's been reported as deceased from the start of my service until current. You have abilities to do things like that. That custom reporting is something that would have to be done through the portal itself.
Great. Thanks for that, Lindsay. And Mike, you just touched on this piece by saying, project work and, for a one-time cleanup. But as far as just data hygiene goes, how often should, these projects be run? We've heard this individual in the question does their projects every like couple of years or so. What would you say is an advisable frequency, if anything?
Yeah, see, there's two things to think about. So we have some clients that will use our project business, so a one-time run, for example, to do maybe an actuarial calculation, so some cleanup. Maybe it is a file that they're looking to do a second check on. So this could be a population of those over the age of 100. There's a variety of reasons that could be a one-time project. For CertiCensus, it's really intended to be that population we'll see as people use CertiCensus for their entire population, not necessarily the actives, but the term vested and those that are receiving a check. We'll also see individuals use CertiCensus for those that are term vested. And so, and exclusively for the term vested, and then use CertiDeath or death audit process for those that are in pay. There's a few combinations that people will look at. Our recommendation is generally when you think about what we hear from our clients is the challenge doesn't stop. So like death audit, people die every day. People also move and situations can change. So a marriage divorce, for example. And so what CertiCensus really is intended to address is it's a little bit of similar to CertiDeath where you get a death. When that death is brought to your attention, it's an actionable outcome. CertiCensus is the same. Not only is a death provided, but if an address changes, you're notified. If there's a missing beneficiary, you can start that process. So it's really a proactive population management solution that's intended to be an ongoing process as opposed to potentially a one-time clean.
And I
Great.
checked there real
Yeah.
quick, Jack. To add on to what Mike said, I'd say, the way you might think about this is it's probably contingent on the population type. Mike, I think, is that fair to say, the population type, and then overlay, governance and financial implications of those population types. So if you've got, people that are in pay, you might have, more governance and financial implications from an audit standpoint versus term vested or other types of populations that maybe you don't need to do something as consistently. That's maybe one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is where is the current plan? If the plan is frozen and might be going through a pension risk transfer at some point, getting the data cleaned up is a big part of making sure that the maximum value of the plan, is realized from an insurance company, for example. So I would say it's the population type and the governance and financial implications of that population type, and then where the plan is kind of in its logical unfolding.
Great. Thanks for that, John. Since we have that three-letter word DOL in the title, I feel like I'm combining a few questions here to make this concise for probably the last question we'll have time for here. As far as, the reporting goes, if a fund were ever asked to show reporting, what does that look like? We touched on it a little bit, but just to reiterate, we talk about the DOL guidelines for finding missing participants. Does this essentially align and would an individual be covered showing a CertiCensus report in the event of an audit? And I'll leave that. I'll punt that out to the group to see who wants to take that.
I would say, Jack, from an audit perspective, we do see clients utilize CertiCensus absolutely with audits. And so what auditors are looking for is, as I'm sure many on this call recognize, is they're looking for a process that is followed and consistently followed. And so with CertiCensus and what it does, it is a consistently monitored solution, proactive plan management solution. And so with those reports, it's able to provide the auditor peace of mind that indeed the plan document and the process align. But Lindsay, maybe if you don't mind, maybe talking a little bit about some of the reports themselves or where we've maybe seen this in practice.
Yeah, no problem. So I had mentioned there before, the reports are very detailed, specifically the audit report, and what you're getting on this report when you pull it at any given time in which you need it, because it's all kept up to real-time information. It's a multi-tabbed Excel report, which on each tab represents different parts of the process. And so one tab will be a complete death audit from the start of the service to the end. So each participant, the source in which we identified their death, the date of death, all of that information is listed on one tab. The next tab is all the participants that have a confirmed address on file. And so we let you know how those participants confirm that information and the dates that they confirm that information and their current address listed. We also, on a separate tab, let you know who are the participants that are in process of getting their address updated. So that means that we've recognized there's an address discrepancy, but either by one of our quarterly address checks, or we've received a piece of returned mail and now we have put them through that process. And we're in the middle of sending out those letters and making those outbound phone calls. Those participants, of course, as soon as they update their address, will fall off that tab and be moved over to the confirm tab. We also have a separate tab that's all around the required mailings. And so every time that we send out a mailing that's considered a required mailing or a notification mailing, whatever we determine that piece of mail is going to be, we let you know the dates that we mailed it, the address that we mailed to, and if it did come back returned, we're also seeing the dates that that piece of mail came back as non-deliverable. And then the last tab of it is all about your relative information. So each deceased participant that we identified that we run through that process is listed. And then it's we can list up to 13 possible relatives for each one of your participants. So it's listed across the page. We always emphasize the spouse first, so you'll receive all the spousal information first. And as it goes down the line, you'll see parents, siblings, children, and such, along with all their address, like I mentioned before, their phone numbers, and their date. So it's all one nice consolidated package for you.
Fantastic. Thank you for the insights around that. And with that, we're right here at time. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. Once again, just a reminder on that survey post webinar, really appreciate any and all feedback. Additionally, keep your eyes peeled for an email coming at you about 24 hours after we conclude here with a copy of that recording. John, any closing remarks on your end here to cap off the day?
No, thanks to everyone for their attendance. Appreciate it. Again, we think that it's important to continue to evolve as an organization, but also that our clients continue to evolve. And with the regulatory focus on different things that will undoubtedly continue, having a comprehensive solution to managing a population, so that not only are people who are owed benefits getting the benefits, which is why we're all here, but also so that we can more easily meet regulatory responsibilities and make life easier for everybody. We think the right approach is a comprehensive approach to population management, which is CertiCensus.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. And we'll see you next time.